Welcome to this Autism Ontario Signature Series webinar. My name is Matthew Lay, and as always, I will be your host. Today, we will be discussing sensory strategies that support participation in daily routines at home with Moira Peña. Practice that a couple times, still got it wrong. Taking care of an autistic child or adult who has sensory differences can make daily routines challenging. I think we all know that. Even getting dressed or eating, leaving the house can be problematic. And Moira has spent 20 years as an OT working with autistic children, youth, and their families. And today, she's going to be here to share some practical things that we can all do to make it easier, a little bit easier at home. All right. Before we get into it, I have a bunch of stuff I need to cover, as those of you who've been here before are used to. So we recognize the importance of language and understanding that preferences around autism-related terminology are deeply personal and continue to evolve. In this presentation, we will use both person first, example, person with autism, and identity first, example, autistic person, language in order to honor the diversity within our community. For more information on the Autism Ontario official language statement, you can check out the resource section of this webinar. Please note that we are unable to address individual questions about specific children or people you may know or support. Today's section will focus on general strategies, but we've done it in a framework that I think will allow us to apply it to very specific challenges that everyone is facing. So we'll be doing general interventions, engagement, along with guidance on where to find further resources. Finally, the opinions in this webinar shared are not necessarily those of Autism Ontario, just so we get that out of the way. So I mentioned already the resources. You can go there now and you can download a myriad of resources. There is the autism overview resources that we always do, but there's also 3 specific guides that we will be referencing throughout this presentation. The process that we will be going through can be dense, and there's a lot of information. So you'll want to get those guides so that you can refer to them either while we're going or after the presentation is done. My job, well, my big part of my job is almost done, but is to get you answers to your questions. So throughout the webinar, please submit questions at any time using the Ask a Question box. A couple things you may not be aware of: on the left-hand side, you can click the closed caption icon to launch captions or translations, where you can get the French translation as well. There's a language icon on the console that will allow you to access the French slides. They're also available in the resources. On the left-hand side is a survey. If you have to leave early, we ask you click on that and answer the survey before you go. Actually, we ask that you all do that before you go, just to make sure that we get your feedback. The more information we have, the better we can do. And finally, if you need some help, just drop it in the Q&A and we will get back to you. Someone will get back to you. All right, with that out of the way, Moira, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thanks for having me. I so appreciate it.
So I know you, we've met, we've talked about this topic, but our audience doesn't. So if you talk a little bit about your 20 years experience, what brought you to the desk today?
Yeah, so I'm an occupational therapist, as you mentioned. Been working for a long time, over 20 plus years, mainly with autistic children and youth, but also with adults. And I have a deep love for sensory processing because I have found out that it's so key to support mental health, like well-being, not only in neurodivergent people, but in all of us.
Right.
So that's my love, and that's what I talk about.
So the learning objectives are up on the screen now. We're going to talk about what is sensory processing, how does it affect daily routines, supporting it at home, something called a sensory diet that we're going to introduce people to, the best framework, which is how we go about applying this to create a more autism-friendly space. But I think I now know why, but let's talk a little bit about why this is an important topic and why sensory processing matters in general.
So sensory processing matters because it really is the way that, like, we're all sensory beings. It's how we interact with the world, with the messages we receive from our bodies. But really in autism, like, we know that up to like 93 to 95% of children and 94% of autistic adults experience sensory processing differences to such an extent that they impact their ability to participate in the things that they need and want to do. So this is why it is so important that we have an understanding on how to best support sensory differences, particularly in our autistic population.
You might get to this, but can you just define sensory processing for me very simply?
Yeah, so it's the way that we interact with the world, like I said. So taking in sensory messages like the lights in this room.
Right. There's a lot of them.
A lot of them. The temperature, whether we're hot or we're cold. So those are our inside messages around temperature. Just the way your clothing feels, the way the noise. It's all these things that we process, and then we do that automatically. It's just when this process is not as perhaps efficient or not as automatic, that's when you have to give it a lot of more cognitive work. Okay. And that's when it becomes something that we need to actually address and support.
So what are some typical ways that sensory processing differences affect the home life?
It impacts all aspects of life. Like, just to give you some examples, like at home in particular, you will notice it in self-care tasks. So like toothbrushing, washing your hair, dressing, eating. Like that is such an area of concern for a lot of parents. Also social interactions at school as well, like in terms of your attention. Like if you're not quite able to sensory gate what's not relevant, so take that out of way, you might be actually paying attention to the noise outside of the classroom instead of actually paying attention to the teacher. You might have this need to move, and so that's the school. And also I think in the community, like going to a restaurant, going to a movie, doing all the things that we need to do. Like sensory differences can really become a barrier to participating in those things that are so important to families. Medical, going to a medical appointment, the dentist, waiting for an appointment, so that is huge. How do we make those spaces more sensory friendly? And then, as I said when I started, is this realization that sensory processing is really the bridge between your physical health and your mental health.
Okay.
You need to be sensory regulated to support your well-being.
So something that I found fascinating is this idea that it can actually be painful, like it hurts.
Yeah.
Explain that to me.
To me, that was a life-changing. When I read the research, when I listened to autistic adults who explained to me how painful some of this sensory input is, that's when I got it. Like I used to think, like way back, 20 plus years before that, people were like maybe just too dramatic.
Right.
But now I know that it's painful. And this is like one of the research papers that just shows for autistic adults how painful, like even just lights can be, noises, having different textures in the mouth. And I think once we realize how painful that can be, we can become compassionate. And we then understand how important it is to support sensory processing.
I was of the mind that it was a distraction.
Right.
That it made things more challenging than it is for other people. But the idea of that pain,
sensory pain,
we answered it very quickly. But let's talk about it in a more clinical way, not too clinical, but let's get into it a bit. So, sensory processing is
input from the outside,
right?
All of the different light, sounds, textures. In inputs from the inside, so whether I'm moving, not moving, whether I'm thirsty, hungry, need to use the bathroom, and then how we put all that together to respond, to behave.
Okay.
And like I said, the important thing is that it's mostly done automatically because, even when you're sleeping, like you can roll to the end of the bed, roll back, not wake up. But when you have to actually give it cognitive attention, that's when it becomes just a lot of work just to be in the world.
And it's unique to every person, right? Like my wife will say that, that noise really bothering me. And I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about, right? So it can be different for all of us.
Different sensory profiles.
Right. Okay. So there are 8 sensory systems.
I know. There's 8. So we tend to think of the 5.
Right.
Vision, hearing, smell, taste.
That's what I learned in speech.
Right? There's actually 3 more.
Right.
And there may be more, but for now we have 8. So your vestibular sense is your sense of movements and balance. So it tells you if you're moving forwards or backwards or in circles or upside down. And just think about how many neurodivergent kids like to be upside down and moving in certain ways, right? Proprioception. Proprio means property. Perception means feeling. So that's your sense of your body in space without having to look at your hands. Like I know that my hands are moving because I talk with hands.
Yep.
Because I'm from Latin America and we all talk with our hands. But I don't have to look at them to know that.
Okay.
Right. So it's like, and when you see that someone is using a lot of vision to control their bodies, that's when you know something might be happening with the proprioception, proprioceptive system. And then you have your interoceptive system or interoception. So intero means inner. So those are the messages from your internal organs that tell you whether you're anxious, right?
Right.
Whether you're hungry, whether you're thirsty, whether you need to use the bathroom, whether you're too hot or whether you're in pain.
Yeah.
Right. So that system is super important as well.
Okay. So the 3 most common sensory profiles, and while we are going through these, this is where I want to alert you to the resources where you'll see that there is understanding a person's sensory profile. If you're unsure as we go through this about your child or loved one, grab that resource. It'll help you in defining this. So what are the 3 most common profiles?
So before I get into this, I just want to make sure that people know that this is not in any way replacing an occupational therapy assessment, right? Like if you really this is can be quite complex, and if you really want some personalized help, you need to see an occupational therapist. So what I'm going to give you is really like some general rules of thumb to keep in mind when it comes to sensory profiles. So something to get you started.
Yeah.
But I really do recommend going to see an OT. So there's the 3 most common sensory profiles are your sensory hyperreactivity, meaning that you are reacting too much to the input. So it could be like what we might call an exaggerated response, right? So, and very common examples would be holding your hands to your ear because of noises, reacting to clothing. So you have to wear the same thing every day because wearing something different is very painful, sensory painful for that person. Seams in socks could be one. Eating, so hyper reacting to the textures of the food, for example. So that is actually the one that's most common in that we know the most about that sensory profile. So we also know that if your profile is one of hyperreactivity, you're most likely to be an anxious person. Okay. Because the world is unpredictable, the sensory inputs are unpredictable, and they're painful. Therefore, of course, you're going to be anxious. It makes sense, right? So that's sort of, and again, if you want to read more, like we have the handout, then you have sensory hyporeactivity. So you're not reacting, you're either not reacting, you're not reacting enough to something, or you have a delayed response to an input. So just to give you an example. So for example, a child gets hurt in the playground, and yet they don't get those signs that they got hurt, but they get a delayed response. They tell you maybe later or when they notice their bodies that they're there, that they may have some sort of cuts or something like that. sensory hyporeactive kids and people across the lifespan tend to get tired quite easily because, they have a lot of effort to just maintain the alertness. They tend to lean onto others, lean onto furniture, lie on the floor. So they tend to not be as noticeable as sensory hyperreactive people. But definitely that is still a very stressful state. So that's sensory hyporeactivity. So the most common, remember, it's perception of pain and perception of temperature changes. That's also quite common here. Like not knowing, and we see this all the time, right? Like kids wanting to wear t-shirts and it's winter outside, or not wanting to put on, they're not able to put on boots to go out in the winter, right? They still want to wear their summer.
So that's not them being difficult.
No,
Okay.
no, it's a sensory hyporeactivity. So again, around temperature, right? So they need more time to get used to the temperature. And then you can also be sensory hyporeactive, but you have a sensory seeking way of regulating yourself.
Okay.
So it means that you're seeking sensory input and like it could be like quite fixated on certain things. Like you could be scripting, saying things over and over. You could be looking at the light through your hands in different ways. You could be putting non-edibles into your mouth, right? So you're seeking constant sensation to try to regulate your senses.
So we got questions coming in, one of which was on my mind. But so is this the break where it's generally hyperreactivity or hypo with sensory seeking, or is it possible that parents are sitting there right now and thinking, my kid's coming all over this?
Yeah. And this is the thing. We are complex beings, and our kids are complex. And yes, it's very common to be hyper-reactive on for example, the auditory sense.
Right.
Yet you're going to be sensory seeking, perhaps in the tactile sense. So you're touching everything.
Okay.
Right? Or putting things into your mouth. So it is very common to have a mix of this. But what I would ask people to consider is that there's usually sort of a pattern. Like you tend to be mostly hyperreactive or mostly hyperreactive, but definitely there are some senses that will sort of, mixed in. And also it might change depending on the context that you're in. Like you might be more hyperreactive at school because of the extra demands and then you may be at home. Okay. But definitely, I think for hyperreactivity, it has to be there in your self-care activities, ADLs. Like it has to be in those. Yeah.
We got a couple more questions here, but in me reading them, I think it makes sense that we move on and come.
We have a lot to cover, yes.
But also just because I think we're going to talk about it.
Okay.
I think we're going to talk about
it.
It. So let's get into what everyone's here for. I mean, it's how to support sensory processing at home. Now, sensory diets, first time I heard this word. Talk to us. Yeah. And I learned it was very different than what I thought it was. So what do you mean when you say sensory diet and talk to us about this?
So a sensory diet is a personalized plan of like activities, sensory inputs, and also adjustments to the context, to the environment. Right? It's called a sensory diet because it's something like you could have like sort of big sensory diet activities like big meals, and you can have like sensory snacks, like small meals. And the idea is that, it's something that you do throughout the day.
Okay.
So the first word that sort of came up was sensory diet, and that's the word that I like to use, but there's other names. The sensory support plan, I like that. A sensory lifestyle. So which is one of the definitions here, which is a sensory lifestyle is how you incorporate the sensory tools that you have into everyday life. So this idea of having a sensory lifestyle, so putting things into your life to regulate your senses.
Okay.
It's also been called feel good menu and sensory routine. Yeah.
Okay. So it says here, it helps to answer questions. What does that mean?
Well, and this is what we put it on the slide. It's like it gives you an idea as to why this behavior may be happening.
Okay.
So you're a detective, right? You're putting on your sensory goggles. It tells you what types of sensory inputs are dysregulated,
Right.
and then which ones actually support regulation, like sensory regulation and emotional regulation, right? And then I think when you're being strategic and cognizant about the sensory diet that you are implementing in your home, it also highlights the way that we co-regulate our children or co-regulate our partners. And it gives you an idea as to what you can do more of. Right. So what's already working? What can you do more of? And then is how can you make your spaces more sensory friendly, more sensory regulating for the person that you love?
So is the recommendation as parents are maybe learning about this for the first time and haven't done it, is it to like, you know, do you alter surroundings from a sensory perspective and try different things in isolation, almost like a scientist, or like you say, to figure it out? So turn down the lights and see if that has a calming effect, or put the rate. Is that part of the way you answer questions?
I think you have to think about the sensory profile, right? Like remember those 3 different sensory profiles. So what is the one that shows up the most,
Right.
right? And then you're going to think, okay, as you said, become a scientist. I think it is a trial and error strategy. However, I would caution to just try one thing at a time.
Right.
So that we know what's actually working
Exactly.
and what's actually not working. So, whatever your tool may be. So you might want to try, keep, like dimming the lights.
Yeah.
And then you just notice, like, did that help in keeping my child more regulated throughout the day if the lights are dimmer, or if it could be so many other things, right? If I offer this sort of tool, it's not helpful.
Yeah.
So you have to be a scientist when you're doing a sensory diet, for sure.
I think it's really key that, we talk about that idea of, not too many things at a time.
Yes.
Because too often, we think that this thing just happened and my child's going through this, so it's because of that. But it could be because of what happened the night before, or other things that have occurred. And so when there's too many variables, it's very, very hard.
Keep track of what you're doing, what's working and what's not. Because what's not working is also going to give you ideas as to what to do next.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. Now the good news is if that wasn't, hard, or if you're wondering, how do I go about doing this? We've got you covered. And that is the best framework. So in the resource, panel, again, the framework is laid out there in great detail.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where we're going to start. So what is the best framework?
So this is a framework that I came up with based on all the, there's lots of research, the evidence behind, like what we're supposed to be doing with, when you're working with neurodivergent kids and like kids. So, and I just sort of read all that, looked at all that, and I said, okay, well, how can I make it into an acronym that actually we could all remember on the moment, right? That's when it's the toughest to put in, intervention is like in the moment. So, best, B is for body. So body strategy. So using the body first to calm the mind, right? So we call those bottom-up strategies. E is for emotional strategies that you can use. S is for sensory strategies, meaning like how can we change the environment to support your sensory processing? And T is for thinking strategies. So what cognitive strategies can you use to support you? And I do have some rules around it. I'm just going to go through them super quick. If you're working with kids, if it's your kid, like you have to do it through play. That's how they learn. Right. That's how they learn. Then I really want people to think about the relationships that they're having, like to really foster that. That comes first. Honor consent. If the person you are supporting is not interested, does not want to do this, you honor it and you move on. Okay, you try something different. And this is a proactive solutions model, meaning that we want to be preventionists instead of interventionists. Like we want to prevent meltdowns and sensory dysregulation.
Right.
And so it's almost like if you get to a meltdown, then it's like, we need to do other strategies. But this is like a way to sort of keep regulation on so you don't get to that.
Right. And the promise is to make life at home easier, right? It's not to deal with
Exactly.
meltdowns or challenges.
Which means that you might just have to change the rules that you might have had for a long time. So you need to be flexible.
Right. Okay. So we start with the body. We start at the top, right? With the B and best. So
yeah.
How do we consider a person's sensory profile as it relates to the body?
Mm-hmm. So remember, I'm just going to give you some starting points. And the way that I like to work when it comes to developing, co-creating a sensory diet, because I always co-create it with the client that I have, would be to start with the power senses. The power senses are vestibular sense, the proprioceptive sense, and the tactile sense. And I just want to say, particularly around the vestibular sense, like it is that sense of movement, of safety on the world, like your balance. It really is essential to develop your sense of psychological safety. So this movement enables psychological safety.
Okay.
And then proprioception, we're going to talk about sort of adding more proprioceptive activities into your day. And tactile is around what we know is calming to the nervous system, which is deep touch.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So let's look at our various profiles, and let's say what we need to be looking at here.
So again, I go into more detail in the handout that you have, but just to give you some idea. So if you think that your child may be more of a hyper-reactive type of person, you want to use sort of movements that are calming, like linear movements. So rocking would be maybe one that you want to try, maybe on a low swing, side to side. Rhythmic sequences, so like simple dances, bouncing on a ball up and down. So anything that's linear would be calming to the nervous system in the vestibular sense. And again, you choose what you want to try and you give that one a go for a while before you change it to something else. If you have more of a hyper-reactive profile in front of you, you want to do things that are alerting, so more random, more like quick type movements. So you might want to try like spinning 5 times one side in an office chair that spins the house, for example. Then the other way. You might want to try some sort of like vigorous dancing. So just bringing up that level of alertness through movement activities. Okay.
Now, would that, because you're bringing up the alertness, it actually would make them less tired from always trying?
More regulated, more aware of their environment and what the expectations are for your routine. Because you want to do these things before challenging transitions, right? You want to do this type of activities to support your day. Whatever you have to do as a family, you're going to do something like short, powerful, short duration, high intensity, and then get you through the transition. So it's strategic.
Right.
Yeah. And then sensory seeking profile. So again, you're touching everything, putting things into your mouth. Perhaps here in terms of movement, so a child who's always moving, then they might do well sitting at the dinner table with a wobble cushion, something that moves because they can move and still be at the table.
Right.
Right. And then also like that movement enables like posture and tone so they can stay up a little bit. Right. Yeah.
Okay. So we want to consider the power senses.
Again, yeah.
What does that mean?
So remember, the power senses are 3. So we went through vestibular. So now I think we're going to go through proprioception.
Right.
So if you go to the next slide, we'll talk about how we can add the proprioceptive, more proprioceptive activities into your sensory diet at home. So again, we're talking about deep pressure touch. So something like, and you will notice this at home, where if your child is seeking like really bear hugs, really tight hugs, they are they're doing things like picking up heavy furniture. They're sticking proprioceptive input themselves. Then you want to give it in a way that's more, appropriate perhaps, or day to day. So, and you also want to give it before they all seek it. So like it might be something like you're using pillows and you're squishing the child around and again, giving them the firm, calming pressure.
And again, this is before a transition or before you're...
Yeah. So like this is a tactile sense. So it's like, so it's before transitions. Right. And you're going to choose when to do it. Right. And then for hyperreactivity, it might, again, you want to, through touch, you want to alert the system, right? So different experiences, and especially like around food, like you want to try something that's like crunchy, maybe has like a spice to it. And you will notice that kids will tend to seek these things themselves. They're going to ask you for like spicy food. And then lastly, sensory seeking. So a child who say is chewing on their clothing, that's quite common. You might want to give them like an actual, like something that's meant to be chewed, like a crunchy snack or like a jewelry, like a tool that's meant to be chewed. So again, they're meeting the need in a more functional way.
You said off the top that, adults, children, you've worked with both sensory diets work. But when I'm hearing these examples, chewing toys or clothes and the like, is it very different, this process that we're discussing, for adults than it is children? Or is it similar and all this applies, it's just the examples are different?
Yes, I think that the audience will tell you themselves that definitely, like I think chewing is a very common across the lifespan. It's just that I think as adults, you sort of learn to mask certain things, but I do know lots of autistic adults who do have like the stuff that they like to. They might use gum, for example. They might have learned ways to meet this need in a way that perhaps it's sort of not as noticeable to others, but that need's still there.
So generally speaking, the process is the same.
The same.
Okay. Yeah. All right, let's move on to tactile.
So we did tactile. Now we're going to do proprioception.
Proprioception.
Yeah. And this one, I think, is sort of possibly the easiest one to implement, in that you do want to have this heavy work component to your activities. So anything that involves carrying, pulling, pushing, lifting, dragging, resisting, and squatting. So like, I do like to do a lot of like wall push-ups with kids. So like, let's push the wall for 10 seconds and then let's do the transition. Yeah. Right. Carrying like a laundry basket, like upstairs, for example. Tug of war with a towel at home. Dragging maybe a wagon with your little brother and you're dragging it. So how can you put more of this heavy work into your home? Chores, a lot of them involve heavy work, vacuuming and so on, right? So yeah, think about what it is that you are already doing and how can you add this heavy work component to it. And in terms of sensory, and again, it's this, if you have a sensory seeker, things that involve resistance, tug of war, pushing the wall away. I like also like pushing your hands together, counting to 5 or 10, wearing a heavier backpack to maybe go to school, again, to regulate that nervous system.
Okay. And the best way of getting a lot of this in is within recreation. Is that correct?
Well, it's sort of, it's optimizing what you are already doing. Remember, the whole point is not for you to do more, but for you to do differently.
Right.
Okay. So I don't want people to think this is like homework. They need to come up with more things. It's like, what is it that you are doing at home and how can you make it more sensory friendly through the power senses? So if you are signing up your child to recreation activities, you might want to have things that have heavy work in them already, like rock climbing in those rock gyms, like all the whole thing is heavy work. If you're going to go and have some fun, you might want to do something like bowling, right? Because you have to carry something heavy and throw it across. Of course, biking, lots of proprioception. And also, there's lots of other benefits, not just sensory, right? Martial arts, running, lots of research around the benefits of mindfulness activities like yoga poses, for example, and swimming. I think swimming is not only is a life skill, it's got all the senses in there, all the power senses, and so if nothing else, choose something that has these power senses embedded. Horseback riding as well. Yeah,
if we can.
if you can. Yeah. And again, horseback riding has a ton of evidence behind it.
Really?
There is something about, and again, I'm sure the audience might mention, something about this activity that is sensory regulating for sure for neurodivergent people.
So now within the framework, we're going to move on to E, or emotional.
Yeah. And I would say, if I could put this first, I would. It just wouldn't fit in the best. And this is easy to say, really hard to do for any parent, for anybody. I think it's this idea of, if you want your child or your person to be calm, you need to be calm. And you really need to think, for me, is, when I'm with my own kids, it's like, am I co-regulating or co-escalating?
Right.
So making sure that you are co-regulating. And really, I find that if you want your children to be more flexible, we need to be flexible, right? And so I think this is so key.
And for those of you, we did an entire webinar. I mean, it was an entire webinar on co-regulation, but it was a real part not too long ago, about 2 months back. It's available on demand on the Autism Ontario website. And it really goes through that, that boat in the storm, and that analogy, which is
you need to be the calm. You're calm. They're calm.
That's right.
They're
calm in their storm. It's very, very good. Okay. So now we're going to talk about the S from best, sensory.
So a neurodivergent affirming principle is really to try and change the environment before you try and change the person, right? So, so there's so many ways, so many things that you can do to try to support sensory processing. So we talked about adjusting the lights, talked about having visual prompts in the environment, making sure you have these predictable routines. Routines are therapeutic in themselves, right? So many, adjusting the noise. I mean, it's so easy in just making sure, like, you might have like tennis balls under the chair, so that when you're moving the chairs, they're not making that sound. Mm-hmm. Choosing when you're going to use the vacuum cleaner, or choosing when you're going to use the blender. So many things you can do just to minimize some of that that sensory input that could be painful,
right,
for a person. Also, the tools that you have that the person can use to regulate. And I always say, but before we even do all this, like, make sure, it's what I call the biology comes first principle. Make sure that the person is not hungry or thirsty, because if you do have this hyper-reactive interoceptive awareness,
right,
it could be that you just haven't had a drink, or you haven't had water for, the last few hours. So you're going to be cranky, or you haven't eaten. So make sure that you meet those biological needs first,
right,
before you sort of start playing with some of the environmental stuff, because that might be enough.
Right. Okay. So
yes,
be proactive. You've said that a couple times.
Did.
And to be proactive, you have to be prepared. Right. What does that look like?
Yeah. I think I used to say, if you can. Now I really believe it's like, we must.
Right.
We must have a space in the home that I call them an island of retreat, where you get to retreat. Okay. And I recommend that you put it like in the place where you tend to get the most meltdowns, for example. Okay. So maybe in the kitchen, there's a corner with like a beanbag chair, and something that the person knows to go there when they need to recharge, recover from all these sensory painful input. You might want to have like a pop-up tent in the home somewhere. But again, it very visible, so that you don't even have to say it. Like, the person just knows where they can go and have this sensory recovery.
Right.
And so I really do believe in sensory family spaces, creating those.
And that, I know, works adults and children. It's not.
We have them at airports.
Exactly.
I mean, there's so many, which is wonderful to see, by the way.
Yeah. might not be a little tent, but we still need it. Still have, okay, this has got to be, I would think, the most challenging. And that's the cognitive stuff, right? The thinking part of it. So using visuals, how does this work?
So I hope that it's come through that, we start with the bottom-up approaches. You're using the body, so you don't have to use that much like, okay, hands to yourself or stop moving or any of that stuff. Like you're using the body to calm the mind. And then you bring in this cognitive aspect of the strategy. So using visuals, so many benefits to using visuals. But, this idea of trying to add predictability to an unpredictable world, I think is huge. So just, again, having the pictures of your sequence of the day, like your routine of the day. And it could be like, now that, just pictures of like your own home and the different stages. Like first you get dressed, then we have breakfast here. Then we brush our teeth, then we go to school, right? So I think visuals are so supportive of sensory regulation because it has that predictability.
Right. People like knowing where they're going, right? No one likes
we all do.
lost.
We all do, yeah.
What else helps?
And I think, we talk a lot about differences, but I think really think about this, the child's or the person's sensory preferences. What is it that they like? What do they like? What kinds of textures? What kinds of smells? What kinds of drinks? Hot, cold. I mean, you like your coffee. I like my cold water, right? Even right there, we have different sensory preferences, right? So what is it that it could be like, going out for a walk and looking at the bark of a tree. Nature is a big thing as well.
Yeah.
It's very regulating. And I think we need to get out more in that way. And so include those in your sensory diet.
Yeah.
And because we know that, and also like your areas of interest or your quote unquote special interests, focus interests, your passions. Those are also the research shows regulating to a person emotionally and sensory. So bringing that into your daily life, I think it's also important.
And everyone's different, right?
Yes.
So what do we need to consider as parents in this regard?
I hope I've given you some, again, starting principles, but we all have our own sensory needs, and this is not a universal template, but I'm hoping that with the handouts and what we're talking about, you do know where to start. And I just love this quote from Dr. Sherry Carter Scott, and it says, growth is a process of experimentation, so you have to try, right? A series of trials, errors, and occasional victories. The failed experiments are as much a part of the process as the experiments that work. And when things don't work out, I call those productive fails.
Okay.
Because, that didn't go well.
Yeah.
And then I'm co-creating with the family. I say, okay, well, what can we try next?
Right.
Keeping in mind our sensory profiles and so on.
Got a couple questions before we move on to how we apply this framework. One is for sensory seekers who engage in unsafe seeking behaviors, punching, kicking, those things. What's a good way of helping them replace it with more acceptable behavior? They tried like punch this pillow instead of this, and it hasn't seemed to work.
So I think, there's a lot that could be going on there. So since, there could be like communication challenges. It could be that, and every behavior is communication.
Right.
So we have to really keep in mind, what is it that the person is trying to communicate? And there's many aspects to a behavior. But I do think if you want to apply like a sensory lens to it, you might, if you feel that child is seeking like to crash onto somebody or they're wanting more body input.
Right.
To, then you might just add more like a safe crashing space in the home. Like you might want to have some like a mattress, like a crashing mattress, or you want to have some things that they could actually intentionally crash into. So then they're not, crashing onto people or things like, for example, if the person is throwing things, you might then want to have a weighted 10-pound ball and you're throwing that back and forth, which is heavy work, but you're not throwing the chair. Right. So think about it. So it's almost like you want to try putting more of this, the pressure, heavy work stuff, and see if that makes a difference to these behaviors that are causing distress, also to the child and also to a lot of people. Yeah.
So that adds up for me because I have a very hyperactive son who likes wrestling, and he used to want to always wrestle with me. And we ended up buying a big stuffed animals. We you get a bunch of those, pull them out. If he wants to wrestle, that's what he's wrestling.
Love it.
Right?
That's a sensory tool.
Yeah. But there was a question earlier that I held, which was about biting and hair pulling, which is much more specific.
Right.
Are there specific things to do if someone's doing that a lot, or is it more about everything you do leading up to it? What about that profile?
Yeah, I think, sensory regulating activities add up. So the sort of the more you can put in through the day, what you're hoping for is less frequency and intensity of a behavior.
Right.
So I just want people to know that like the behavior may not go away, but if it's even just a little bit less, like that's success, right?
Yeah.
Like, so notice once you put a sensory diet in place, is that behavior happening less and with less intensity? I think with hair pulling, like that is a very complex behavior. Yeah. So of course, the first thing that you do is really try to keep your hair away from, any chances that it might get pulled. But then if you want to think of replacing like that pulling type of thing, like, what comes to me is like remember those chia pets?
Yes.
You're pulling, like something that's meant to be pulled in some way, and sort of just offering that and seeing if that might meet some of that need.
Yeah.
Right. So, and then for biting, right? You mentioned the other thing. I think for biting, really this keeping that mouth tool. So, using straws to drink liquids from, crunchy snacks, like keeping the mouth with that heavy work.
Yeah.
I think that can be quite effective to again, less frequency and less intensity of that behavior.
Right. But also applying the overall framework to determine if that is akin to a meltdown, or if it is a sensory seeking need. Okay. Now let's talk about applying the best framework at home. If you haven't done so already, this is in the resource, very detailed resource on how to go about doing this. And there is an image of what it looks like. Download that, print it out. So just a reminder of what the best framework is.
Yeah.
And now we're going to take a look at something that happens quite a bit, is dealing with transitions. So sensory diets support morning transitions. Walk us through the framework as it relates to this.
So lots of parents tell me that this is a real challenge to get the kids out the door to school. So just to give you some ideas. And again, remember, it's not a template. You're going to try a few things and see how it works. So for example, as you're waking up your child, you might want to do like a tug of war as they're coming out of bed. Okay, and pull, count to 10, maybe push the wall. Then you could bomb down the stairs, get that boom.
Yeah.
You could do like animal walks, like a crab or a bear, to the kitchen table. That's where you're going to have your breakfast. But again, remember how you have to do the transition anyway. How can you make that transition more sensory friendly through these power senses?
Right.
You might want to carry like a weighted bear, like your son perhaps, to the kitchen table. Wearing a heavier backpack to get out the door, and you might just want to give your child like 5-5, but that's deep touch pressure as they come out the door.
Right. And once again, then when you've done the diet, you understand what works. Now it becomes routine.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Right. So it's work at the beginning, at the front end. It's a bit of work at the beginning, but you're going to see the reward. Right. And then you can think of again, that best framework, right? Like what are the sensory tools that you could use? You could use a wobble cushion at the kitchen table. You could have like a yoga ball that you do some of that linear movement on. And that could be maybe, right before you get dressed, right? And side to side. So what kind of tools can you have available? It could be that you have also ear defenders, like noise canceling headphones, right? Available. So you have lots of ideas there. And then remember, is how can, like for emotional strategies, is how can I model staying calm and connected to my child? And I think one of the things parents can also try is them using the tools themselves, like a noise canceling headphones for parents. So when your child sees you trying this thing, they're more likely to try it. Right. So really try to model using it, and then to actually narrate what this is doing for you. This is helping me to get through, my cooking or whatever.
Yeah.
So really narrate what's happening when you're modeling the use of the tool. I think that's super important. Yes. So we talked about, so that's the emotional. The S is for sensory, change the environment, not the child. So again, what kinds of tools do you have for somebody who wants to, who is a sensory seeker and touching everything? You want to have these fidget tools, things that are meant to be squeezed. And then, T is for thinking. Really try to take pictures of the morning routine, the way that you're hoping is going to go, and just review it with your child.
Like take pictures with your phone.
Take pictures with your phone, and then just put in a sequence. I mean, you can also laminate them if you want to, but I just think just having okay, this is my bedroom. I think that the connection is right away. This is my bed. Then this is my kid, and then I get dressed and I go to the kitchen, whatever your sequence may be.
Right.
Because some people get dressed after they have breakfast or so on. But have that sequence, review it the night before. So again, adding predictability. I think it could also be just like, for your child who could just, it could just be a sentence, get out, dress, this, that. So you just go through like the check boxes. Yeah.
All right. So,
and then, we're going to do one for toothbrushing. That's another very common one. And this is for a hyperreactive type of profile.
okay.
So
Is that the profile it normally has issues with, or can it be any of them?
it could be any of them. This one is more like sort of for the hyperreactive, but it could be very much hyperreactive kid who cannot tolerate certain things in the mouth.
Yeah.
So again, preparing the mouth, so adding that proprioceptive input. So you might just want to offer something crunchy before they actually brush their teeth, right? Sucking liquids through straws. In terms of vestibular, you want to add that movement, into the bathroom. Maybe you're going to stop into the bathroom. You're going to have maybe some, if you're hyperreactive, like some dance moves to get you up, to get you alert, then go into the bathroom, and just add more alertness through brushing like the tongue or the inner cheeks, for example. If they're hyperreactive mostly, add more input through the mouth, through the wiping. Emotional, how can I stay calm? Right? How can I model stay calm, while we're going through this activity? And for a hyporeactive profile, like there's so many things you can try. There's so many things out there right now. So like a vibrating toothbrush might be something. Again, it's going to be alerting. Using different types of flavored toothpaste. What is it that they like, that they're seeking more of? Make the bathroom more inviting. I think this one's huge. Like bring stickers, things that they like, things that are there's like their special interest, like whatever cartoon, like bring those into the bathroom. Make sure the bathroom is nice and warm. Like just make sure you make it sensory friendly so that the child wants to go into the bathroom. And then again, the thinking strategies, like really do have those visuals, because it's not just, it's going to help with communication as well. But what our aim here is adding predictability to an unpredictable world.
Okay. So speaking of that, we have a lot of questions, and guys, we're not going to get to all your questions today. But we are going to sit back, review them. We're going to get them answered, and you'll get notified about an In Focus series, new series that we're doing, which is going to allow us to dive deep. But one thing that I want to address here is, you talked about predictability. We're getting a lot of questions about, in some cases, like stigmas of certain things and that. And so one of the questions that I pulled out was, how do I explain my sensory issues to my parents or to my kid's teacher? So how do we explain it to other people who maybe don't know to help us advocate that they need something to chew on or fidget or safe place or whatever it might be?
I actually think that sensory advocating is a great route to advocating in general for yourself.
Okay.
So, like, you could say, um, as an autistic person, autistic child, you could have like a note that goes out to your teacher. I like this, like, all about me. Like, if it's a young child, like, you could do like, this is what my child really likes. This is what my child.
There is an All About Me temp on the Autism Ontario website and the back to school.
I love that, right? That's for teachers, for kids. I think as an adult, I mean, there's so much research now there. Like, it's that sensory differences really do impact it's really a barrier. It could be a barrier to an autistic person.
Yeah.
And really, how can we make like a workspace more sensory friendly, right? At work. So I do think there's a lot out there in the internet to support your advocacy. But sensory advocacy, like, I need to wear noise canceling headphones, because that just helps me be more in tune with my work. I think if you give examples of how these tools can help you, then people then can understand what, like, you're not just using it to draw attention to anything. You're using it to support your functioning.
So with school, I mean, there's a lot of accommodations that are occurring. And so explaining it, I think, would work. The first part of that question about being parents, I assume their challenge with their parents is a lack of understanding. So you had mentioned that there's a lot of resources out there. I will say they could watch this webinar because it's free and it went,
send it.
But if you were trying to help a parent of maybe a certain generation who doesn't understand, what would be a good way for someone to help educate them?
You know what comes across a lot for me is like having grandparents, for example, understand what's going on, because it's like different parenting practices.
Right.
To parent in this way means that you're doing a lot of respecting of that child's autonomy,
Right?
Which may be very challenging for other people, different generations, different cultures, right? Expectations. So again, I think you're right. I think is finding, and we actually have one resource here, a one-pager, amazing resources on sensory, the reference list,
Yes.
I think it's called.
Yeah.
It has like a ton of articles,
YouTube
videos. I just give them that.
Right.
I think that would be great.
Yeah, Autism Ontario resources. It's the one with all the links on it. Go ahead and grab that. So let's wrap this up for everyone in a nice tidy bow. Summarize the key points of what we discussed today.
I'm just going to go through this, become a sensory detective, right? So make sure you're watching and listening. Validate the feelings, like sensory input can be painful for people. So you can step into that stance of compassion for your child, for the person that you are supporting. Try it. Try to create this sensory diet. Like, start with that. If you can get support from an occupational therapist, please, please, please do. You'll find out so much more. And then, use this best framework to guide you. And I think you have another. Yeah. And remember, start with the power senses. None of this should cost a lot of money. Like, this really should be budget friendly.
Right.
When you're understanding the concepts, co-regulation is key. Like, this is so big. Work on that. It's a practice. It's a practice to stay regulated when your child is dysregulated.
Right.
It's just a practice. And it continues. It continues. And then embrace productive fails. We're all complex. We're all unique. It's going to take time to figure out exactly what works. And then, try to include your team, like your interdisciplinary team, your behavior, people support, like your SOP, if when you have a team working together, I think you can go far for sure.
Exactly. Well, with that, we've come to the end of our time. I want to thank Moira. This was very, very interesting. If I haven't said it enough, make sure you grab the resources before you go. There is a ton in there. For those of you who maybe this is your first time being in one of these, know that this will be available on demand on the Autism Ontario website later today or early tomorrow. Either way, it's at the same link. If you know someone who you think might benefit, maybe that grandparent that we talked about earlier, or the like. Pass it along. It's free. And the more people we get through these programs, the more we are able to put on. Before you leave, make sure that you complete that survey. And with that, I'd like to thank you for all the time, all the great questions. We're going to get to work getting you those answers. And we'll see you next time at our next Autism Ontario event.